men det är bra.
Ja.
Nu ser vi ingenting. Hej allesammans och välkomna. Jag tänkte bara säga typ hej. Ja, jag behöver inte säga så mycket mer.
Oh, me.
Welcome.
That was even quicker than I was expecting.
Yeah,
No one else wanted to say anything? Just all right.
we can talk later.
Oh, all right. All right, so thanks everyone for coming. Every time I come and teach a class here, group's happy to have me speak, and I'm happy to come and do this sort of stuff. I am here, actually this week, teaching a class on kind of scripting. If you couldn't make the class, well, I'm going to kind of give you a cheat into some of the stuff that I was covering. For those of you who are here, who are also taking the class this week, some of this will look familiar, it's stuff we've covered, or it may be things that we have yet to cover. I have a little talk, and most of it's going to be all demo. Okay, I have like 2 slides, 3 slides at the most of any meaningful material. Everything else is in a GitHub repo. I may or may not get through everything that's in my list, but if you go to the GitHub repo, you will get everything that I would have talked about if we had unlimited time. And I will obviously answer questions at the end. Now, I'm going to be talking about scripting. So I did want to bring up 2 books, because most of you know that I do write books, and I've written a lot of books with Don Jones. A lot of you know who Don is. So I want to clarify a few things about some of the scripting books. Now, first of all, I'm going to assume that you already know how to use PowerShell, more or less. Hopefully some of you more than the less side. Once you understand how to work with PowerShell and type a command, get something to happen, then you might want to say, hey, I need to start writing scripts and stuff. If you are still kind of new to PowerShell, the recommendation that Don and I are making, and other people as well, is to get a copy of this book, Learn PowerShell Scripting in a Month of Lunches. This is the latest edition that just was published in November. If you read the previous edition, you're probably good. We cleaned up a few things. We added some new material. I mean, sure, I'd love for you to buy another copy, but I'm not expecting you to. But if you are still kind of getting started in PowerShell, this would be the next book you'd want to look at. After you go through that book, then you have this other book that Don and I wrote. This is published on LeanPub, PowerShell Scripting and Tool Making. There will be a tiny bit of overlap between this tool making book from Manning, which is fine because repetition is always good. This will go into some more advanced and deeper topics. The other advantage, at least I think it's an advantage, to this book is it's basically an ebook. So you get it as an ebook version, or you can read online as a PDF or download a PDF. Typically when you buy a copy of this book, though, you get kind of a lifetime subscription to the book. So as Don and I add new content, which we're in the middle of doing now, you get that content. You'll get a little email saying, hey, Don and Jeff have published a new version or released a new version of this book, and then you can download it. What I like about LeanPub is they've got a send to Kindle feature, so I can buy a book and say, boop, send it right to my Kindle, done. If I get a new version, the only thing I have to do, if you are Kindle people, is delete the book from your Kindle and then resend it. Otherwise you end up with multiple versions. So those are the scripting books, and many of the things I'm going to talk about kind of are covered in those books. So if you want a little reinforcement, that would be where to go. All right. This is the demo part. It's really all the main slides. We'll do questions, and then all my contact info, which, wow, doesn't display as nicely on the projector as it does on my screen. But I've got a few business cards that people want, but the easiest way to find me is on Twitter. All right, so that's slides. Let's go into my demos. All right. Just for the sake of clarification, oh, you are not seeing, why is the, my PowerPoint still in presentation mode. Sure, why not? Now let's try that. Okay, that's better. And that's really nice and big. So what I have here in this little talk are kind of my collection of little tips and tricks. Hopefully a lot of this is common sense or things that you are already doing. So maybe I'm just going to validate that, oh yay, I'm doing it the right way. Or it may be something, oh, I never thought of trying it that way. So hopefully I'll have some of those here for you. And these are some of the things that we're going to go through. Hopefully as much as I can in the next hour or so. First of them is use something that understands PowerShell. If this is you, don't tell me because I will want to do something physically violent. Well, maybe. I will want to have words with you. How many of you use Notepad as your primary editor? Who's brave enough to? It kind of works, except, well, there's nothing, right? There's no IntelliSense, there's nothing that tells me if I get an error, there's no shortcuts to. So your first real tip here, which hopefully is common sense, but let's be clear here, is to use a PowerShell aware editor. If nothing else, at least use the IC, which is built in. Because now I get, right, you get all that color coding, you get Control-J, so you get all sorts of snippets. If I make a mistake, so let's say I delete that, I forget to put in the curly brace, I get all sorts of, oh, you got squiggles, you got something wrong here. Notepad, at least my version of Notepad, doesn't do that. Maybe the Swedish version does. Probably not. So you have to at least use a tool if you're going to be writing PowerShell code that makes it easy for you to do. Now, I don't have installed on this laptop, at least in this virtual machine that I'm in, I don't have VS Code. That is another great example of a tool. And if you're just getting started in PowerShell scripting, and you haven't invested a lot in learning the ISE, at this point you might skip it and just start learning how to use VS Code. VS Code is free, and you can go and download it from Microsoft. Going forward, VS Code is going to be the editor of choice. The ISE is not going away, but Microsoft is also no longer developing it. Other than, obviously, any critical security features they might fix. But you're not going to get new features in the ISE. The ISE that I have here in Windows 5.1 or PowerShell 5.1, that's it. There will probably never be a new version of the ISE. It also only works on Windows. You all know that Microsoft is now moving cross-platform. And even if you are not a cross-platform kind of guy yet, maybe not your job now, but maybe your next job, you might be writing PowerShell code that has to run cross-platform, or it's going to run on Linux. That's where VS Code comes in, because that will be cross-platform. So you might as well learn one tool that you'll be able to use multiple places. Anyone here using VS Code? All right, so those of you who are not, talk to the people who are and ask why they like about it. There is a PowerShell extension that you need to make sure you install, at least as a starting point. But from there, it's pretty good. There's a bit of a learning curve, especially if you come from the IC into VS Code. Worst case, if you get stuck, ask for help on Twitter. Go to the forums at PowerShell.org. But you want to use something other than Notepad. You would think that now that we're in PowerShell version 6 that I wouldn't have to say that, but there are still people who just don't seem to get it. All right. Next little tip here. Require statements. And try not to wander here too much. You can use as many of these as you want. One of the things that you want to do when you're writing a script, and by a script I mean also if you're defining a function or a set of functions, is even when you write the function, it still has to be in a script file, and that script file, that PS1 file, has to be executed. Well, you want any problems that might arise to happen as soon as possible. At least I do. I don't want any script I'm running to not realize, oh, this isn't going to work when I'm halfway through doing something. That, for me, that would be really bad. So you can include, and hopefully you are doing many of these things, a number of statements at the beginning of your script called pound requires. Normally, right, that's a comment. You go, but PowerShell, if it sees pound requires, just like that, at the beginning of a line, it says, oh, this is a directive to me to interpret. The most common one you will use is the first one here, the version number. If you are writing code and you're using a commandlet that only exists or didn't come into existence until a certain version of PowerShell, and there's a possibility that code might be run in an older system, you'd want to put in the version number. So that is the minimum version number. As you can see here, I've set this to version 5.5, even though I'm only running 5.1. So if I try to run this script, I get an error message saying it can't be run because the requires or the version number doesn't match. And so if that happens, I get that error message, and let's say you've given the script to the help desk and they call you and say, oh, well, yeah, you need to upgrade your system in order to run that code. You can also include a module-specific reference saying, hey, the code I'm using is using commands, let's say, from the SMB share module. If it's not installed on the computer, don't even try doing anything else. Give me an error. You can also specify, if you look at the help, you can also specify a specific version of the module if something has changed. This also, I believe, has the side effect of preloading the module if it's not already loaded into the session. The new feature that was added in, I believe, PowerShell 5 is the Run as Administrator option. So if my script that I'm running, if it needs to run elevated, and they are not running elevated, that will throw an exception. But assuming, in this case, all those things are met, then the rest of the code will run. So if I set this back here to say 5.0, and that works, so then all my, because I'm already running elevated, you can see here, I'm running administrator. So it works, and I can run get SMB share and everything just as happy. Now, the only tricky thing that you have to watch for is if you had a comment later on like this requires me to blah, blah, something, PowerShell is going to try to interpret that line, that comment, as a require statement. So you just have to, if you get something like that, now this will work because that word requires isn't pound requires. So it's kind of those odd things that you go, oh, wait, what's going on here? That's why. All right, any questions on that? And for any questions over any of these little tips here, you can go ahead and stop me. Otherwise, I will just keep plowing through. And there's more beer if you need more beer. All right. Next little trick here. Long pipeline versus several steps. Now this is something that I talk about all the time. When you are creating PowerShell code in whatever fashion, yeah, there's some techniques that you can use. Whether it's the right technique really depends. And it just depends on all sorts of things. Writing good, effective, beautiful, elegant code is really as much of an art as it is a science. Because if it was just a science, we could just write a program that would just automatically generate code. But to generate really good code requires a human. However, what has happened for a lot of people, especially guys who are new to PowerShell, because we talk about the pipeline and stringing all these things together. So when you go to, which works great interactively in the console, then you go to write your function, and you start stringing all these long commands together, and it works. Yeah, but is that really the right way to do it? And it could be, but you have to stop and say, is this the right way to do it in a function or a script? Is it truly the most efficient way? Does it run the fastest? Is it the best way for long-term maintainability? Or if I have to go back and debug and troubleshoot, is it easier if I break this one long pipeline expression? Maybe it's better if I broke it into several lines of code. Because remember, when you write a script, you're only writing it once, ideally. So the fact that you break it into 3 lines of code versus one long pipeline expression, PowerShell doesn't really care, but you might care. Or the person who has to look at your code after you get promoted, they will care. So let's look at some examples here. And I am using the measure command commandlet to try some different things just so you can see how long it might take. Now, most of the times you can see maybe the difference might be in milliseconds. Who really cares? However, if you are building something that might be running against 1,000 whatever, maybe those milliseconds start adding up. So, again, one of those things you kind of have to just, you got to balance everything. So I have here, and just for the sake of making it easier to see on the screen, so technically, this directory command is a one-line PowerShell command. And I can already know, because I'm running this on a VM, that there's nothing in my documents directory. But what the heck, we're going to try it anyway. So again, it's this long expression that's basically going to get on my top level directories, and then for each one of them, recurse through and get all the files and get me a directory listing of all the top level files. I'm going to try something here and change the path. Just the demo on GitHub will still be documents. I'm going to change it on the fly here and use my temp directory and hope that that's a little more meaningful. So let's see how long that takes to run. All right, so that took 64 milliseconds. And just to prove that it actually ran, go back up here. All right, that's what ran so quickly because I've got really nothing. In my little test domain here that I'm using, all right, that took 139 milliseconds. And just to prove that I'm not hiding anything. So that's kind of the output that I got, right? One thing to be careful of with measure command is there potentially could be a caching effect. So you may need to like wait a few minutes before you're trying different things. Now that worked. But if you were, and again, I had this written all as one long pipeline expression. Is that really the right way for it, the best way to go? Again, it depends. Let's try this with multiple lines here. And let's change my documents to all right, so now we're going to basically break that one long line, that one long pipeline expression into multiple steps. And then, so we get a top level listing of folders. And then for each one, I'm going to get my measurement object and then save that data and then pipe the data back out to the pipeline, sorting on the size, which is everything that that first command is doing. But this, again, for those of you who are newer to PowerShell, this might even, if you don't fully understand PowerShell, this might be easier to read than that first line. If they go, so if so you might need to troubleshoot something along the way, that might be a better way to go. Let's see if it runs any faster. I think I've killed enough time to maybe eliminate any caching effect. All right, so that was 129 milliseconds versus, what did I have before, like 139, I think? Yeah, almost 140. So technically, it was even a little faster. And it's even a little bit easier to read. So if I were to build a script around this concept, around this kind of code, I'd probably try something like that. Because for one, it's easier for me, because I can comment then along the way about each step that it's doing. I can have some error handling. So let's say this first part didn't work. I couldn't get any directories. I could catch that error, display that before I even bothered doing anything else. Or you may want to be a little creative. Or need to provide, for example, some verbose information. Now, because this isn't really a function where I can have dash verbose, I'm just going to cheat and turn on the verbose pipeline. So we can pretend that if this was in a function, I'd have run it with dash verbose. Although with measure command, I'm probably not going to see it anyway. Let's find out. Oh, I do see it. So there the verbose message is. So then by splitting it up, I'm able to add some feedback to the user saying, hey, this is what we're working on. Or even for you, if you're trying to debug or figure out, hey, how come my command's not working? Well, for the first step, I found 4 top-level folders. If you found 0, but you know there are some, then you go back and look at, okay, how come I'm getting 0? Whereas if you have one long pipeline expression, that could be a little harder to troubleshoot. And the whole thing took 151 milliseconds. Now, that's probably because I'm including some of these other verbose messages. If I set this back to the default of silently continue, well, in fact, that was even faster. That was 100 milliseconds. And here's an example, not necessarily faster. It's a little slower, but This is, oh, that's because I'm using the wrong path. Yeah, 109, not too bad. So in this example, and I'll run it again so you can see the output. This is including a regular expression to replace folder names with appropriate slashes. No, I'm not quite sure it worked with my path there, but by splitting up the long pipeline expression, if it's appropriate, may not be what you, if you have a pipeline expression and it works, fine. I guess a rule of thumb would be, if your pipeline expression is like 2 or 3 things, that's probably okay, as is. But if your pipeline expression, if you're stringing together 5, 6, 7, 8 commands into one thing in a function or script, you might look at, hey, it would make more sense to break that up. Sometimes you want the pipeline, get service pipe to stop service or whatever. Fine, I'm good with that. But in like the example I'm using here, with this one long monstrous pipeline, even though it works, is it the best way? Maybe not. You have to decide. Using things like measure command is a great way to determine which is the faster way. Or what other requirements do you have? For example, adding the verbose output so I can provide some feedback and troubleshooting information. To me, that's worth a lot. Any questions on that? All right. Let's talk about splatting. I think I already have this file open here. I probably have several commands here. All right. Get event log data. So this first version of my function is just basically a wrapper for get event log that's going to get errors from a given event log after a certain date on a given computer. I have some verbose entries. When I wrote this command, you can see the get event log. It's a long expression. Now, I've made my font size pretty big. Most of you probably still might have it set to, you might have something even bigger. But you got to scroll off, and I got to scroll over to read the rest of the line. I got to put in the parameter names, because the best practice, right, is put in parameter names with your full commandlet name. Now, it will work. So I can load the function, and let's say I want to run that on the system event log for anything in the last 7 days. I'm just going to get the first 3 of them and select a few properties just to demonstrate that this works. Okay, so there's nothing necessarily wrong with that function. It works, it gives me the result I'm expecting. Maybe from a maintainability point of view, there might be some better ways to do this. So let's look at the second variation on that command. I still have the same parameters. But now what I'm going to do is use splatting. Splatting is a way of taking a hash table and basically throwing it at a command. And that's what I'm doing down here. Notice how much, obviously how much shorter that is. I don't have to visually or even physically scroll over to read here. Now, how do we get to that point? Up above, I create a hash table. You can call it whatever you want. I happen to call mine params. The hash tables, remember, name, value, pair. The name or the key that you define corresponds to a parameter name for the commandlet that you are going to throw it against. So in my case, right, it's log name, entry type, after a computer name, and because I'm in a try-catch block, I need the error action set to stop. So I can then define that hash table on the fly. Now, I don't know about you, but personally I find it easier to read stuff vertically as opposed to having to keep scrolling when things are really long. Theoretically, right, it's a hash table. I could have written this horizontally, separated by semicolons. That kind of defeats the whole purpose. But when I splat it, I reference the name of my hash table variable, but instead of the $, you use the @ symbol. There's no $sign in here. That's what trips people up who are new to trying to figure out how this works. The end result, I'm not even going to bother running the code because I tell you it's going to be the same result. But if you look at that code compared to the code in the first example, which is easier for you to read? I'm assuming most of you are going to say this is. There's no necessarily performance benefit that I know of between one versus the other. This is a whole lot easier to work with. But wait, there's more, as we say in American late night television when they're trying to sell you. I don't know, do they have that here?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. If you order now and use a hash table, you can do other things. I don't have it in this example. Because it's a hash table, you can also modify it on the fly. So let's say that the log name, I knew I always wanted it. Oh, you know what? Let's say I want to get every log name that's on the computer. Because you can do that, right, with get event log -list. So maybe I'm going to write a version that's going to get the latest blah, blah, blah from every log name. I can then add a line of code to get event log -list for the computer name, and then go through every log name from that list and plug it into my hash table, and then rerun my get event log code. So what I would end up with, I'm going to do this on the fly. I'm not going to try to run it. List. We'll just pretend local computer. You're never supposed to change a demo live, but I'm going to. Whatever the, full log name, there we go. Something like that. So what I've done, in real quick, ugly code, is I've created a hash table, and then I'm dynamically updating that hash table by just changing one value, because everything else is the same. And then I do my get event log command and the rest of the code that I want, as opposed to having to repeat myself over and over again. I'm not a big fan of having code that's copied and pasted multiple times when I can do something efficient like that. that make sense? You guys understand what I'm doing here? Now, what you may need to do is add some comments as to what this is doing. Again, so the next person doesn't swear at you going, I have no idea what you're doing here. But that might be more efficient use of code. Now, the other thing about hash tables and splatting, where it can come in handy, is using PS bound parameters. Expand everything here. Every time you run a command, you have a built-in built-in variable called PS bound parameters, which is a hash table of every value that was passed as a parameter. Basically something that PowerShell bound or hooked up to your command. Because the parameter names in my function are identical to get event log, I actually can save myself a step. I don't have to create a new hash table. I already have one. The only thing I need to do is add the error action stop parameter, or add error action, give it a value of stop, to PS bound parameters, and then I can splat. Technically, I could have splatted PS bound parameters and then added -error action stop, but it's much nicer, I think, if you just add it to the hash table. And that too will give me the same result. The benefit is I did not have to create that intermediate step of adding the new variable. I'm just reusing because I already did that. Now, you would have to create something new if for some reason your parameter names didn't match for whatever other native command you're calling. But in this case, they match, so I can just use them. Now, although this won't quite work, let me run this here. And okay, so in my verbose output, I have a statement to show me the values of PS bound parameters, which is not lining up on the screen here, but that's the key. So log name of system and whatnot. If you see here, though, the entry type, I have a default value of error. That does not show up as a PS bound parameter because I didn't tell, no one told the command, hey, use this value. The script will use it because it's set as a default value, but PS bound parameters doesn't see it. So the way around that is the last version. So I'm checking if the PS bound parameters, if it does not contain the key entry type, then go ahead and add basically my default variable, my parameter entry type. Because it's a hash table, right? So with hash tables, you can check if keys exist, you can add, you can remove, and that's all I'm doing here. Except I'm using the built-in hash table, so now I can dynamically account for default values. Now if I run this as expected, and if you look at my PS, so I still don't get PS bound parameters, doesn't show it. What I should do is, just for the sake of the demo, is I should write verbose to PS bound parameters after I add the key. So you can see that it's there. In fact, do that. So there's PS bound parameters before, and here it is after I've added my new value. So then I could just splat this hash table to the underlying get event log. And my code is nice and simple and easy to read. Does that make sense? Does that look useful? Anyone splatting right now all the time? Is it a helpful way of working? Yeah, it should be. I mean, if it's not, then don't use it. But I think most people, once you start splatting, you just can't stop. All right. What are we doing time here? Oh, yeah, I knew I would not get through everything here. Objects. Right? We all know PowerShell is about writing objects to the pipeline. Most of the time, we often will use select object with that custom hash table, right? Name equals, expression equals. That's fine. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But you may want to find maybe using the PS custom object type accelerator might be a more efficient way of working. So I'm assuming a lot of you have written code that kind of looks like that. Yes? No? Right, where you've got all these, let me scroll up here so we're not at the bottom. Right, so you got all this ugly looking hash table stuff. Now, it will work. Let's do it with measure command first. We can see how long it takes. All right, about half a second. And just so you can see what the result is. All right, so that's the output that I'm generating with all that gobbledygook, ugly code. So we might be able to improve performance let's test it first, and then we'll go back and look at what it's doing. Or not. That took, oh no, that was fast, because the first one was 500 something seconds, right? Yeah, that was 556. I get the same result now, and almost a little over half as long, 364 milliseconds. So let's look at, see what I've done here. $P. What's $P look like? I mean, it's a hash table. What do you think I'm going to do with that? Based on the structure there, you know I'm using getSimInstance. Actually, if you look ahead, you can tell what I'm doing. Right? I'm splatting. Makes that line of code. And of course, in a script, I might even, white space is helpful, and it makes it easier to read. Now, for each disk that I get back from the results of running getSimInstance, I'm going to create a custom object using the type accelerator. The custom object is just another hash table, and then I can take the properties that I want and then assign a value based upon either the incoming object, or in this case, I'm also using getSimAssociatedInstance to go out and query, make a secondary query to the machine to get that value, and then that is written to the pipeline. As you can see, that is that much faster, and this code might also, I think, be easier to read than the first example. So if you have a lot of code where you are doing stuff with all these, now if you only have one or two, you're probably fine with select object. But if you find yourself writing code that looks like this, you might want to consider restructuring it and maybe use a custom object. It's a little faster too. You can also get a little note here about tweaking performance. With getSimInstance, by the way, and that's what I'm doing here. With getSimInstance, if you use the -property parameter, PowerShell will only return those properties with the sim instance object. So it can speed things up a tiny bit. If you know you only need properties A and B, then only get those to come back. If you were to look at the object in PowerShell, the default display will show you all the default properties for that class, but you'll only see values for the ones that you asked for. So it's a nice little way of speeding things up. Again, if I was running this, say, against 100 servers or 1,000 servers, those little changes start adding up. And then the other option, you might even consider moving to a PowerShell class, because I want to create a particular type of object, and maybe I want to make that a class. That PS custom object, that's almost the beginning of a class anyway. You could copy and paste that into a class construct, and you're on your way. Here's another example of a little secret, or maybe something that you may not have considered before. And that is the use of PS default parameter values. Now, how many of you even use or know of PS default parameter values? You should be up here doing my talking. So PS default parameter values, real quickly. Is it new? And I don't have anything defined here. The whole point of PS default parameter values is a way of adding a shortcut so that if I don't provide a value to a parameter for a commandlet, it will always be there. I can use a default value. The syntax is the name of the commandlet, colon, the parameter name, and then the value is what you oh, got the wrong. So now I have set a default value for get service, because normally when I run get service, you get all the services, right? So now, if I hit enter, what do you think is going to happen? I basically now I can change that. I can say, no, you know what, I need the WinRM service. In this particular case, because get service will recognize the wildcard, I'm able to override that. If I wanted to, I could also clear or remove them, but the assumption was that you would use something like this in your PowerShell profile and set default values for things that you use all the time. For example, in my profile, in my test domain that I connect to, because I'm not part of the machine, part of the domain, I always want to connect to a specific domain controller. So for all of the Active Directory commandlets, so anything that's, I can do like get AD star, so now this example here that I just did says anytime I run any commandlet that starts with get AD something that has a computer name parameter, use the value of DOM1. And I don't have to remember to put that in. That's what we're talking about with the PS default parameter values. In a function, here's one way that you could use it. This is, again, more probably just for the sake of demonstration. I have in my function that I have a bunch of, because I haven't learned how to use write progress, which is the better way to do this, I'm using write host to display progress messages to the user. That's a fair use, but I want to make sure that write host is always in a different color. I need to have a background color. But I don't want to have to keep typing or copying and pasting the -foreground color parameter, especially if I decide I need to change the color. So I have some code. I've got a little kind of a sanity check here at the beginning that if for some reason the person running this has already set a default value for the foreground color for write host, I'm going to save it, because then at the very end I'll change it back. Otherwise, I'm going to add write host foreground color and set the color to cyan. Now, every time that write host executes, it's going to use that foreground color because there's a value there. And then all I do at the end is, hey, if I happen to have a saved value, then change my parameter value back to what the user had, so I don't mess up their code. But if you use this, you might need to make sure you document what you're doing. All right, so now I've loaded my function. I don't have any values I need to worry about. Now when I run this, and that's because the machine I'm using doesn't have the stuff that I set up for my demo. But you can see the right host. That's the important part. If later I decide, oh, you know what? I needed that foreground color to be green, I can just change it there and not have to worry about copying and pasting and making sure that I change it everywhere in my script. Let's just query my server that has that public shared. All right, so now it works. So using that default value, and I could use this for other things where if my command, say I'm using some other command, it's kind of like using a splatting with a hash table, except I can set a default value and know that it's always going to be that. I could, for example, have made sure that, knowing I'm always going to call get SMB share, I could have set a default value of error action and always set it to stop. That way, even if I forget in the try catch to add that, it's already there. That may or may not be a good thing, but something that you may want to look at. And I'm not going to save my changes there. All right, we're running low here. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, so much we could. Yeah. Well, you have all. If you go to the GitHub repo, you can download a zip file with everything, even if I don't get to it. Performance differences between set content out file versus using the .NET framework. This would probably be more of an advanced thing. If I send something to out file, in this case just 500, right, 280 milliseconds. If I send it to set content, a little faster. And if I use the .NET framework, a little more code is involved, but that's even faster. Now, I'm not saying that, we'll just skip using out file and set content, because those provide some nice features, such as setting encoding and what if and other things that you might want to take advantage of. But if you are working on something that is becoming really performance sensitive and you're dealing with writing files to disk, yeah, there might be better ways to do that. I will leave the rest of that demo there. There's a little trick, something that I always do, kind of in a habit. If you notice here, like the close of this switch statement, I have a little comment, close switch. At the end of the try block, I've got try, catch, for each. Whenever I create a construct that's like a closing, especially a curly brace, I am in the habit of putting in a comment about what that curly brace goes to. Because, you know, this curly brace here, well, already, if I didn't see that, I don't necessarily know wait a minute, what code is that up above it? Because I don't see the try because it's scrolled off the screen. And there may be times where at the very end you got like 6 curly braces all nested in and go, oh, did I forget one? What goes with what? Whereas if you put in a comma like that, it makes it a little bit easier visually to tell. And if you start collapsing your code, especially in the IC, VS Code doesn't fully collapse everything the way that I want it to. Notice here, see I got my close function. So if you had lots of functions all in the same module file and you collapse them all, that's kind of nice. As I go through and expand things, you can begin to see where and how that all works. So making sure I haven't missed anything. Now in PowerShell, and especially in the IC, if you select the first curly brace, it might be kind of hard to tell, but it will kind of lightly highlight the matching curly brace. But I also like having my little visual cues. Doesn't affect how fast or slow your code runs, but it makes it a little bit easier to see where you are. The nice thing in VS Code is as soon as you put in an open parenthesis or curly brace, it automatically adds the old one, or the closing one. I like that. That could be one good reason for going to VS Code versus the IC. And all right, I'll do one more, and then we'll take some questions here. How many of you write modules? How many of you write excellent documentation and help for your modules? Yeah, about that. Oh. Nope. I think I need to do is change my module directory. All right, so I have a module here, and let me go ahead and import it. And this has a couple commands. If I do like help for get sys info, or do -full. All right, this gives me just kind of the basic information. There's no description, there's no help, nothing like that. I could go through and create comment-based help in the module file, but who wants to do that anymore? Instead, what you can use is the module from Microsoft called Platypus, which I don't think I have installed here. So I'm real quickly. No. All right, this will just take a moment. I need this for my class anyway. So I'm going to go out to the gallery and install the Platypus module. I'll say, yes, I trust Microsoft with my life. So now I have a new module installed. This is an open source project as well on GitHub, so if you have problems or enhancements, you can file an issue. What Platypus will do is give you, and Microsoft is using this everywhere now, and this should be your approach to creating documentation. It's a two-step process. First thing you're going to do is create markdown documents for your commands. And then you can take that markdown document and it will turn it into the fancy XML mammal format that Microsoft needs. We no longer do comment-based help. If your command is something that already has comment-based help, when you create the markdown help, it will interpret that and then you can delete it. So we are going to create some new markdown help for my module, which is already loaded into memory. I'm going to send the output to a directory called docs, and why did you... why did you give me an error? Cannot find. Try this one more time.
I don't find Paul.
Yeah, and I don't, even though I'm using a UNC, unless, now, it's very possible, I'm using this P drive is a UNC to my laptop itself. So it's possible that there's a bug. What's supposed to happen, and here, I'll just jump to my laptop itself. Let's get out of the VM. Now, I do have VS Code installed on my laptop here, so let's just bring this up here. So I kind of ran the same thing. I imported my module, then I do new markdown help for the module, specify the path. Every command then, you end up with a markdown document. Now, if you've never worked with markdown, there's a bit of a learning curve, but it's actually pretty easy. I've even figured out how to work with it. Most of this was generated automatically by Platypus. It will leave you a little placeholder saying basically fill in the blank. So all you have to go through is give it a synopsis. You just type in the text, type in whatever description you want. All the other markup headings and stuff, it does for you. and then adding your examples. That's where all you have to add. Then once you are done with that, then you run the new external help command. Say, hey, I want to take all of the markdown documents and then turn them into an XML file. And then you're done. You put that in a folder in your module subdirectory that is culture specific. So in my case, it's en-us. And it will go through and create the appropriate help file, named everything the way you need it to be. So now when I load my function, if I do help export my timer, all of this help here was generated through Markdown, and then I created the help file. If you are doing things the modern way, and you are building projects that you are publishing to the gallery, you're more than likely also publishing this to GitHub. So if you were, I don't think I've published this one yet to GitHub, but if you go to my GitHub repo and look at a lot of my other modules, if you drill down, you'll see a docs folder that has the markdown version of everything. So you could even browse online and see, oh, here's the documentation for Jeff's module. No comment-based help. Platypus generates, and if you decide at some point, oh, I'm updating the commandlet, my function, I'm adding a new parameter or something, there are commands in Platypus to basically say, hey, refresh with something new so it doesn't wipe out and force you to start all over from scratch. It's not perfect. There's still a few bugs that you might come across in it, but it's so much easier than comment-based help. And certainly if you are building code that's supposed to be, that you need help to be, say, multiple languages, because then you can localize, once you create your markdown documents, you could create a different folder for a different language, localize it, and then when you create your markdown, the actual external help, the XML file, you just specify the location to be the other culture. So if you had to write a function and you need, oh, I need Swedish help and I need Finnish help, because my Finnish help needs to have lots of vowels together. I can say that because I have Finnish friends. You could do that. And what you can't do with comment-based help, but I can with Platypus. So if you've not looked at the Platypus module, I would encourage you to do so. Especially if you are building stuff that you are sharing with the world, which you all are, right? Because if not, you should be. All right, so as I said, and let me bring up the slide deck again and put up the URL. Now, are you taking questions from the web at all? Okay, you're not. I should be able to just go back here to PowerPoint, bring up the last one here. So while I'm bringing this up, questions. Why it's not finding my last presentation. Questions over anything that I covered or didn't cover, or something that you hoped I was going to cover, or you just all want the extra beer that's here. All right, so again, there's the GitHub link if you want to get a zip file with all of the demos that I covered or that I didn't cover. Questions, comments, was any of that useful? Did you pick up something and go, oh yeah, I need to go use that? Or did you already know all of this? It was a complete waste of your time, other than the free beer.
How about pester tests and
oh, you should do them, yes.
yeah, and like when you're doing functions and doing more of a test-driven development, should you?
You should do those things, yes.
Yeah.
So you should use Pester, and you probably should do test-driven development. I don't. I mean, I do use Pester. I'm not a test develop. test development driven kind of guy. And by that I mean, for those of you who have not used Pester, Pester is a module, I mean, it ships now with Microsoft, with Windows, that allows you to build a testing framework so that when you're building your function, you can run through and say, does it meet in these scenarios, does it work? And then so when you go and change something, did I break something along the way? You can rerun your suite of tests, go, oh, good, I didn't break anything. There is some school of thought, and this comes from the development world, where a lot of this comes from, where you build your Pester test first, saying, I'm going to create a function. And in order for the function to be successful, it has to pass these tests, X, Y, and Z. And you define that first. Then you write your code to pass the test. Now, as you're developing your code, yeah, you're going to get some failures because you have not developed that code yet. But when you're all done, you should pass the test and you should be complete. I don't know, maybe just because I come from a batch file VB script background where I can bang it out, it works. Now I just want to test it, build my Pester test to make sure that going forward, I don't screw anything up. It's kind of a trade-off. Now, in the United States, we have this concept of, for schools, we have this thing called Common Core, where the teachers are expected to, you've got to teach this material. And so a lot of the way that they teach is to make sure basically teaching to the test. I got to teach this material so the student can pass the test. But when I went to school, that's not how we learned. We learned, I think, the right way myself. If we passed the test, fine, we passed the test. If we didn't, it wasn't necessarily because the teacher failed, necessarily. But they're so focused on, got to pass the test, got to pass the test. Whereas you miss some of the bigger chances to go, oh, wait a minute, let me try this. And for me personally, when I'm writing a PowerShell script, I kind of want that freedom. I don't want to feel, oh, I can only do the test. Now, sure, I can go back and modify the test. Say, oh, I need to add this element. I'm just too wild and free-spirited to say, I just want to create my code, and then I'll go through. Because then I can go through and say, now, as I wrote this, I anticipated that I wanted to be able to use it in these scenarios. So I can then build the test. So even if I forgot something, I still can get it covered. It's up to you to decide whether you are driven by your tests or you build your code and then you build the test to validate everything works and you're good going forward. I'm not sure if there is any community accepted, well, probably the community would say, oh, you should do test-driven development. I'm going to be the radical and say, you don't really have to. On the other hand, I've also been writing PowerShell code for 10 years. So I'm a little more forgiving. For those people who are just getting started, and this is where it's hard for me to put myself in those shoes, it might make more sense to build your tests and then write to that test, because it gives you some structure for what code you need to write. I kind of already know that just from experience. But Pester could help you as a newer coder. So there is that.
Yeah. You could write tests afterwards also, because
oh yeah,
it's not that, I mean, a lot of developers also kind of cheat and don't do the test before.
Developers cheat? No.
No. Yeah. So of course, there's more of. Yeah.
There was some other. Do you have another question, or I thought I saw another hand?
Jeff, you had a comment about that we should all be publishing our stuff on GitHub. But, some of us have actual customers. So, do you have any tips for people who solve problems for customers would like to publish their work in some sort of anonymous way? I mean, we can't always show the work that we do.
Well, first of all, you should not have any hard-coded data or parameters or anything in your code. You should not have like hard-coded domain names or computer names or credential names. This just should not be there, just as a security rule of thumb plus good scripting practices. So if you find yourself with code that has, oh, I've got hard-coded domain names and customer identifiable stuff, your code probably needs to be revisited. Because you should be writing code for those customers that is customer agnostic. Because unless the customer is in agreement, say you can only, I paid for this code and I'm the only one that can ever use it, you may write something and go, this works for them, but I need it to work for maybe another customer. If you've got hard-coded stuff, that's not going to work. Your other option is to use something like VS Code, where you have the feature to change all occurrences. And if you have something that you feel is customer identifiable, just change that, make a copy of your module that you can publish, and you basically anonymize or strip out anything that's customer specific. But ideally, you shouldn't have anything like that in the first place. If you do, we need to have some talks. But that's a good question. And you don't have to use GitHub. There are other places you can share your code. And of course, you know, GitHub is just Git. It's just a NuGet style repository. You can set up your own GitHub repos. I have a Synology NAS device at home, and there's an option if I wanted to, and I should do this, to go ahead and install Git or a GitHub. So I could set up in my home my own little GitHub server if I wanted to.
You could also use Visual Studio Team Service online.
Yeah, if you
have that,
hate yourself,
you have free.
Yeah, there are plenty of other options for sharing your code.
Yeah.
But if you share your code online, okay, I'm going to get on my soapbox here. You got to follow the best practices, which means proper commandlet name or function names, no aliases, full commandlet names, full parameter names. You've got help documentation. You got to do those things. If not for you, then for the next person looking at your code, or the person who's downloading your code who has just started a new job and then said, I've worked with PowerShell for 3 days. You got to help them out. The PowerShell community is a fantastic community. As I think a lot of you know, we're all very eager to help each other. That's why I'm happy. I could stand up here for hours and just keep talking to you. I'd be very happy to do that. I might have to sit down at some point or get another beer, but so everyone's very eager to help, but you have to show that you got to help the right way. So yeah, publish. Anything else? Now theoretically, at least on the books, I'm scheduled for another course back here, I think in March. It's a PowerShell and DevOps course. If I come back, I'm happy to speak again if you guys want. Otherwise, I don't know anything else on the schedule. If you are interested in that next course, don't wait to register. I don't know what it is about Swedes, but this course I'm doing this week, everyone registered at the last minute. And of course, it almost didn't happen because I got to plan ahead if I'm going to come here. So if you are even thinking about coming to my next course, do it now. Don't wait to the last minute to register because it makes it easier to plan. So that's my little ask of you for coming. All right, I've got nothing else. So if there are no other questions, do you have anything else you need to close with? No, they don't want to talk. All right, so thank you all for coming.